that was the last time. Usually the only time we have public comment is people running for office. A lot of times would show up pre-COVID. Everybody else, usually they just reach out and they ask if they can be part of the, to do something. They don't usually just show up. And now that that's also what everything is virtual.
Yeah.
So now people can just watch if they want to know what's going on too, which makes a big difference. No way that was small. Can we live?
Yeah, we're like.
Okay. It's virtual.
Hello, everyone. Good morning. So who do we have? Dana and Deacon? No, Kevin?
Good morning.
Morning, Deacon. I think Dana was in transit, so she may.
Oh, yeah. No problem.
Yeah, I'm driving to Coos Bay, so I really appreciate the virtual option.
We're glad you were able to join us from afar.
Okay, well, let's call to order the March 6th North Gateway Redevelopment Advisory Board meeting. Can we start with roll call?
Jared Martin.
Here.
Deacon Lucas.
Here.
Mike Alley.
Excused.
Yeah, excused, yeah. Nathan
Okay.
Levin, thank you. Scott Cantonwine. Yeah, we've got Dana Castano.
Here.
And Kevin Loss.
I'll keep an eye out for him.
Okay.
So he pops on.
Can I get a motion to approve the agenda? So moved. Second. All in favor say aye.
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 All opposed say nay. Agenda approved. Can I get a motion to approve the minutes from the February 6th meeting? So moved. Second. All in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Say nay. Minutes approved. No public comment. This meeting, we're gonna be talking about the 2640 Portland Road development. And I'm gonna let Sarah start with her.
Well, thank you. So good morning, everybody. In your packets, you should have seen that I did include a memo. Basically, it just recaps the conversation that we had at our last meeting, which is sort of where we are in the process. So I'll give a little bit of background just as kind of a reminder to everybody. But we have our 2640 Portland Road site. We purchased that site, back in 2019. And it's been used by our houseless service providers for housing. Currently it's being used for administrative uses. And we had initially purchased it with the idea of the extension of Pine Street, because that is in our CIP. After conversations with Public Works and the railroad, along with sort of not moving ahead with the third bridge that would have linked into Pine Street, it became evident that that project was not going to be feasible. At that point, the board supported sort of the discussion to have an updated market analysis along with a development study done for the corridor and for that particular site, knowing that it's a unique site. It's just under 1.7 acres. It's got some transportation sort of constraints in terms of its shape and location. It's adjacent to the railroad. It has environmental issues as well. And so going through that process was able to kind of help start to define the things that could be successful there. For those of you who, may not be as close to it, as a reminder, we still have sort of a single-story commercial building on the site that's about 4,800 square feet that we would, be proposing to obviously take down as part of this. Residential is not currently permitted on that first floor per DEQ. We could look into potentially doing some vapor barrier work for different types of uses, but the idea of having any sort of residential on the first floor is still very much not recommended. But depending on what outdoor uses there could be, we could be looking at something else. Yeah, this is just in case you wanted a reminder. The current site zoning is mixed use 1, so it gives us tons of flexibility, which really, helps in terms of what we may or may not want to do. We can do residential 2nd floor and above, we could do commercial, we could do industrial. In terms of some of the demographics, the background that we looked at in terms of, who is our audience, who are we trying to, who are we looking at in terms of complementary uses, or if we're looking at housing. One of the things that came out in our study is that, the corridor of this site is actually growing faster than a lot of areas in the city and in the county. And we have a young and diverse population in the area, which is great. It's also home to about 18% of our industrial properties. And we have an incredibly low vacancy rate for those as well. So kind of gives us an interesting mix of things. Some of the considerations that we took into account when we were looking at what types of uses might make sense here are things that, the surrounding area is sort of a big mix. We have industrial, we have the fairgrounds, we have residential, and we have gaps in all of that because of whether it's parking or whether it's, a more dilapidated site or things of that nature. So there's opportunity for growth surrounding. The rail line is going to impact in some way, shape, or form because it does run along. So it's just something that we're going to have to sort of figure out as we move through. It has a good proximity to I-5. It has good proximity to downtown. It also has good proximity to medical facilities. So, those are considered positive traits for the site when we're looking at development. This particular corridor, and we've talked about it before, does have a larger share of multifamily and middle housing units compared to other areas of the city, and a higher share of renter households. So that could be positive. It could also lead to potentially oversaturation. That's kind of where the consultants were. There's a little bit of risk on that one. In addition, in this area, retail space does have a very low vacancy rate. Retail is still a little bit of an iffy thing right now, but within this particular area, it seems as though the retail that's there has been able to continue to be successful. So a lot of these things say it makes it kind of difficult to decide what we may want, because there's a lot of potential options. For those of you who may not remember, when ECO came back with sort of their recommendations of types of developments that we should maybe focus on that would be the most successful, industrial flex space is one. Medical office was one, and then looking at some type of affordable housing with sort of that main level maybe being retail or services or something of that kind of component. So that's kind of what led us to today. And so where we are is we sort of have all this information, which is great, but at the same time, you all have experiences, knowledge, feedback. And what I would like to do is sort of start the process of defining the types of things and goals, so keeping it kind of broad, that you would potentially think would be successful or would make a lot of sense for this particular site. What we're trying to do is kind of build this list, and then we're not taking any action today. But what'll happen is we'll kind of come up with our list, and I've given a template to start with, and we'll kind of go through those. But these are not things that we have to move forward with. You can say, I hate this one, let's add this one. But at least it gives us a conversation to start with. And then we'll take the list after today and I'll send it out to everyone to do an individual survey to kind of rank those things. And then we'll start to build that priority list as we start to do some outreach and look to actually build kind of what will look like our developer outreach, like what we've done for Block 50 and Block 45. So this is kind of the kickstart to sort of that process. So I don't know how you want to do it, Jared, if you want to just start in a conversation, if you'd like me to go through the list, if you want to go through the list, I'll kind of.
Well, remind us what we can't do.
So
Can't do any first floor,
we can't do first floor residential,
can't
but
do
we
first
wouldn't.
floor childcare, can't do
Yeah.
first floor, anything really that has to do with
True.
people.
But I don't think, I don't think at this point you wanna go to that level of detail.
Got it.
So, but you can say things, and that's kind of how I built the list, so encourage additional industrial flex space. Urban amenities, so is that something that's really important to people? Now, that could be grocers, that could be childcare, that could be daycare. It's things that would kind of make sense for that particular area that would be a service or a use. Providing innovative, flexible, affordable workspaces. There's been a lot of conversation of, do we need to have more like co-working type space? Another one is increasing the tax increment. Is that important to people? You're in the URA, you do want to increase the tax base, that's the goal. So is that something that's a priority? So it's much more broad, encouraging job creation. Because we're not landing on like, this is the one thing that we want. It's more, these are the things that we think could be successful or important for that site. And then we would have a developer come in and sort of try and give us different ideas as to what they think would work, is what we're trying to do. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So we don't need to say like, we would love to see, daycare on the first floor and this on the second floor, and we want 55 parking spaces on site. Like, we don't need to get to that level, because the idea is, what are the types of things that are really important? We'll prioritize them, and then let the developers come in and kind of give the show. What do they think they could do? So it really becomes a public-private partnership versus us trying to dictate what we want to see there, because often that may not be successful. So this way it leads us to having a good negotiation and conversation.
I, excuse me, have a series of questions regarding the property that would help clarify some of the potential.
Sure.
What you do with it after that. So the first question is, who owns it?
We do.
City of Salem. Okay. Free and clear?
It's free and clear. No mortgage.
What are the environmental issues?
So, it was previously, I can get into all the details, but it was an oil, so there was oil storage there at one point in time, back in the 70s, I wanna say. Everything has been pulled out of the ground, but because of the vapors that could still be coming out, over time, DEQ actually put into place that we were not allowed to have residential on the main level. We can have other uses, and a developer may come in and want to do an additional vapor barrier just to be safe. But that's the current restriction that's in place. And of course, as you know, you can do that, but once you start digging down, you never know what else you're going to potentially find. We also can't do anything that would impact the current groundwater or expose that could be an issue as well. So that's part of where we're at.
So the question as it relates to the hydrocarbon residue, residuals, etc., you will be going into the subsurface with water lines, sewer lines. Utilities can stay fairly close, so within just a couple of feet, they can run parallel to the surface, but the question is, how deep does the water and sewer lines need to be to service the site?
So I can't give you the number off the top of my head, but I have already had a conversation with DEQ, and we have a really great environmental consultant, and actually DEQ is one of their clients. And so that's been really helpful. So what I've been told is at this point, any standard development that we would want to do won't have any problems. If somebody wanted to do subgrade parking, that's where we could run into issues.
Yeah, no, that's.
So yeah, we've had some initial, and as we move forward with this site, I will be keeping our environmental consultant on board, so they'll be able to work with us and whoever the developer is and with DEQ. The one thing is we actually, and I will, full disclosure, we don't have the NFA on the site yet. It's actually connected to an adjacent property, which we were not aware of. Everything's been signed off for our site for years. But for some reason, because it's tied into an adjacent site because of previous ownership, they're trying to get that taken care of and then both get the NFA. So there's a little bit of weirdness there, that we're still dealing with.
Okay. And then another question is, what has been discussed with the city and the state as far as access and egress, as far as current driveways? There is one on Silverton Road and there is one on Portland Road. Approximately direct from Pine Street and also south about midway on the western boundary. So are those 3 driveways okay to be maintained?
It'll depend on the development. So we haven't gone to the level of which would need to be open, which would need to be closed. But when we did our development analysis and we had Eco go through it, what they did is they took into account all of our existing zoning requirements in order to come up with those development models. So there may have to be changes depending on what is proposed and the location of, and how that's gonna flow. But at this point, I mean, we're trying not to close anything off because we wanna make sure we're giving as many options as possible.
Sure.
Yeah.
And then the other question is, do you have, you said that there was a market valuation done. Is that something that is public or not?
We did a market analysis of the quarter. We did not do we haven't done the valuation on the site yet.
Okay.
That's up and coming still.
When do you think that will be completed?
I'm assuming we'll probably start looking into that closer to when we have a developer on board.
Okay. From my perspective, as changing hats here, it would be my suggestion that you have a sense of where that number is going to be, because that's going to drive the interest of whether it's economically feasible or viable for a potential developer. If you're talking about a not rectangular site, about 70,000 square feet, setbacks and requirements put on place by the city is going to be effectively controlling how the site's developed.
Mm-hmm.
And the other issue that I picked up yesterday at lunch from a friend that I had been on the planning commission with some years ago, they bought a piece of property that looked like an industrial site with industrial zoning to use for warehouse distribution and sales, and they were told by the city that there was not a minimum parking allowance, but a maximum parking allowance. So now you've got a retail business that has warehouse, employees, etc., is being told how many total parking spaces they can have as compared to how they can use the site, which is a huge negative as far as future development, ownership, etc. If I was developing that site for that purpose and the city started putting in limitations on what I could have for parking, that could very potentially be a deal breaker as far as the viability of the site.
Definitely. So as just a sidebar to what you said, as a reminder too, one of the things that we had Eco do is they did their own valuation of property. We don't have an official one, so it's not information that we have to provide to somebody. And then they outreach to developers, and then that's when they went through and they figured out what could actually be put on the site based on existing zoning. And that's when they also ran the numbers to figure out what type of development could be financially feasible. Now we know something like affordable housing would require additional incentives from the city. It's not something that would be feasible without more, it would require more than just us selling property for say $1. Something like industrial or medical would still need something, but not to that level. They could mostly be able to move forward on their own. Mixed use was something that did not work out at all. The numbers didn't make sense. You couldn't have the breakout didn't work. So we have done some of that, Nate. But I think, you know, what you say is completely makes sense. But I also think that's where we sort of start the conversation, which is why we're trying not to say it has to be this. It's more of, these are the types of things that are really important to us. You know, these are the big picture things, like, you know, do we want something that has a good relationship with Senate 50 plus? You know, more of those broad goals, and then kind of see what the development community brings to us. And they may bring something to us and say, hey, we can do this, or we can do X, but you've got to have more buy-in. And we'll start to figure that out as we go through the process. For those who, and I know we talked about it a little bit, but you know, for block 50 and for block 45, kind of how the process works is, you know, we sort of, you know, for both of those, we put out just like a small little blurb. It's like, here's the 5 things that we kind of think are really important. Give us a development. And they kind of come in with a proposal. They don't spend a lot of money or anything like that. It's not all fancy. You don't have, you know, diagrams and models or anything. And then from there, we kind of have a matrix and we score them. And then what we actually ended up doing for both is we offered up a certain amount of funding to those top folks to kind of help do some actual modeling and do some additional work. And then they came in and they were able to do the full presentations. But even after that, we still have to negotiate. You know, we still would do a development agreement and things like that. So there's a lot of room to kind of work through these sorts of things. So this is kind of what we call that first step of like, there's a whole list of things, and some of these may be terrible ideas that I put down, and some of them may be spot on with what you all are looking for. But what I think at the end of the day, as we were trying to do is kind of do all this pre-work, is just make sure that like, we didn't have everyone come back and say, you can't develop anything. Like, what are you guys even thinking? And that didn't come back, which was the great thing, you know, but we know it's a challenge. And the numbers are always, I mean, they're changing today versus 2 days ago. Let's just be honest, you know, tariffs are now making a difference in terms of imports. So I think it's, you know, we're gonna have to be flexible too, in terms of like, the nature of development is just all over the place right now. Luckily, it's not a fast process, so I guess that helps us. But I think all of those things are things that we'll have to take into account. But what I did appreciate is when we did have EGO look at it, you know, they were saying like, we're basing everything based on your existing zoning and your existing standards. You guys not asking for anything new. And they were upfront about, you know, these are the types of things where the investment from the URA would be much more minimal than something like affordable housing where, you know, you're looking at, it could be a couple million more that they're gonna need in order to make it happen. And, you know, that's sort of where we kind of landed. But at the same time, you know, there's been other things that have come up, which is where sort of the, you know, the idea for the job creation, or the idea for, you know, workspaces, or the idea for, you know, those urban amenities. You know, those all came from things, you know, that came out of the Portland Urban Action Plan, where people said, you know, we want more grocery stores, we want more community space, we want more services. And so that's kind of where I tried to tie some things in. You know, other things that have come up with the block 50 and 45 conversations is, you know, is there a preference from the board of, would you prefer a local developer or a local developer partner to be part of this project? Or is that something that's not of a higher priority? You know, do you want to make sure it's a one-phase development? I think that's pretty straightforward because of the size, but you never know. You know, do you want to make sure that it aligns with the goals and objectives of the URA, of our Portland Urban Action Plan? You know, those are the things that you know, do you want to make sure it's, you know, is green building important to you? You know, those are the things that I guess I'm trying to suss out. Are there things on this list that you're like, please take off, they're not important to us, or you forgot something that's really important to us? Is kind of what I'm trying to make sure of, because I just pulled a bunch of stuff together, and you're always smarter than me, so I use you to look like I know what I'm doing.
I would say we all have different perspectives.
Yes, and I appreciate it. So that's kind of what I'm also hoping to suss out. Like, what on here should we get rid of? What should we add? What would people love to see?
I think one of the other things that it would be important to know is, what would be the maximum allowance, urban, renewal contribution as far as, it seems to recall that there's like a $500,000 cap.
So
for infrastructure.
it's all about prevailing wage. That's really what it's gonna end up coming down to. So, 749 is where that kind of triggers. So depending on the type of development and if, they're trying to avoid prevailing wage, that will definitely lead into how we can participate for sure.
Yeah.
And so that'll be part of the conversation is, if they don't wanna pay prevailing wage, then that's really gonna, dictate. There's things we can do with the land, there's things that can be done in terms of SDCs.
Can a developer with an approved project just purchase the property and do it individually?
If we were to put it on the market, yes, but that's not what we're doing right now.
So
If we were just to list the property, then
Right.
anyone could buy it and do that, but what we're doing is we're trying to say, these are the types of projects or the goals that we want this site to meet,
right,
and they have to propose that to the city. That's the route that we're going right now.
so if a developer proposed a project that was acceptable to the city, once that was approved, can they just buy it and do the development?
Yeah.
So if that's the case, if they can just purchase it and do the development, where does the prevailing wage component come from?
It depends on if they want incentives in order to do that project. So we can do this, but our financing is gonna require this, and this. Somebody could come in and say, we don't need anything from you besides just the standard grant. That's completely fine. It's really up to
Okay.
each developer.
Okay.
And part of our criteria as we move into like phase 2 and phase 3
Yeah,
of the process.
I didn't understand the contingencies.
No, it's fine.
So, okay,
There's a lot of moving pieces with it.
okay.
And that'll just be one of those things where each developer is gonna come in now, the board could say, we don't wanna give more URA. I don't know if I would recommend saying that upfront, because we may not get a lot of, depending on, development options. But as we move through the process and as we interview folks, that could be part of the decision making is, we can get X project over here and they're wanting all this additional things, or we can get X project over here and both are meeting these goals, but they're not requiring as much, which leaves us some money to do some other things. And those will be part of those discussions that'll be made, as we move through the process.
Okay.
That was a question. Oh,
Thank you.
Morning, Scott.
Hey, good morning, everybody. Sorry for arriving late, and maybe that's going to drive some of my question. So is the goal to maximize return to the city and get these properties into tax revenue generating status, or is there more to it?
So Scott, what we're trying to do is right now what we're talking about is specifically just the 2640 site. And so really what we're doing is I've kind of in your packet, there's a list of just goals. And what we're trying to determine is, what goals would you like to see for the site? Are there things on this list that you absolutely think do not make sense? Are there things on this list that you would like to add? Increasing tax increment is a goal. But we can have, a very lengthy list of those goals. And then what's gonna happen is after this meeting, whatever this final list looks like, I'll send it out to everyone on the board and you'll do your own individual survey to prioritize. Based on how all that comes in, we'll have sort of now a priority list. So increasing the tax increment could be high on the list, or it could be the urban amenities is high on the list. That people would like to see a development that, looks at, do we need a grocer? Do we need services? Do we need, and so, or maybe design creativity, or, you wanna make sure that you've got a local developer. So we're just kind of going through this list today to kind of say, hey, what other things would y'all like to see that I didn't put on here? Or are there things on here you absolutely don't like? And then we'll sort of start going through that, because what's gonna happen eventually is when we put out a request for a developer, is it's gonna be really broad. We're gonna say, hey, it's in the North Gateway, urban renewal area. Here's the overall goals for the area. We're a very unique and diverse area as it is. And here's, some of those top priorities that we'd really like to see out of a development. And we're gonna put it on the developers to sort of come in and give us some ideas as to what they would do on this site. And from there, we'll start to work through that process. So that's kind of what we're doing today. So today's really like we've done our research on the site. We know what we can and can't do. We know what's feasible, what might require some more of our money. And now we're to the point to say like, hey, what would you like to see? And let's start flushing that out.
Sure. I think, no, that makes sense. I think one thing I would add to the conversation is when that request for proposals or request for information goes out, I think it would be interesting to solicit those ideas without the carrot of dollars to try and find self-sustaining ideas.
Okay.
Because I think from a net benefit perspective, if you sell a property for, I'm just gonna use round numbers for ease of mental math. If you sell a property for $2 million, then you end up giving away $750 or $749 for accuracy. You're netting 1.25 instead of putting it on the market for 1.517, having a greater net benefit to the city. And as they said in Field of Dreams, if you build it, they'll come. If the property is worth that, if the ideas are there, I would kind of lean on the market a little bit to bring some ideas, bring some financial modeling, and ultimately create some benefit for the city without us having to kind of, have a big carrot out there.
Okay. We can add, I'll add something to the list that's specific to sort of a self-sustaining, non-incentive kind of development concept.
There you go. That's probably fewer words.
Does that work?
That's perfect. Thank
I'll
you.
come up with something, and I'll add that to the list for sure. Are there things on this list that you guys just don't like? I mean, that's always the easiest place to start. What don't you like that you want me just to cross off?
We're talking about the items to consider.
Yeah.
Okay.
This is just a generic list. Like I said, I pulled it from a few different places, but you guys probably have tons of ideas that I did not even, think about.
The only thing that I think housing is really hard on this site, one, because of parking, and two, the train tracks. And I know trains run that track pretty often. So I wouldn't put that at the top of the list. I wouldn't say,
So
it
don't,
can't happen,
Okay.
but I would just say, I think that should be the least of the goal in my mind.
so don't take it off though. So you still wanna prioritize it.
I don't know. I just think that would be really hard for a developer to sell, get sold on because of the train tracks.
Okay. I think it would be hard to remove it entirely. The only reason I say this, and it may not make a difference, is we do have sort of obviously a council goal for more housing.
Yeah.
So I think we leave it on the list, but obviously as the board, you guys are gonna go through and prioritize whatever's on here. And so if it falls to the bottom, it can stay at the bottom as we sort of go out and we talk to, counselors and folks, and we'll see kind of what happens. But it just, the higher on the list, sort of the more weight it's gonna carry when we go to reach out to a developer. So it could be one of those things where someone might include housing, but maybe that's not where we're giving a bulk of points. So it could just be, oh, that's great, but maybe that's not what, we're looking for at the end of the day. We'll kind of see how that plays out.
I do like the grocery store idea. I just don't know if it's doable on that small of a site, just parking, even if you were to do a small grocery. Because I know there's nothing really out here.
Yeah.
All the way to what, Roth's? On Portland
Fred
Road?
Meyer's pretty close on Broadway, but I agree, grocery seems like it would be really challenging because it's just not that much space.
Yeah.
I think that stretch from that Safeway to that Roth's, or the Safeway downtown to the Roth's further north on Portland Road, this is purely conjecture, but probably one of the longest distances between grocery stores in an urban area in Oregon.
Yeah.
Well, I try to keep it broad with the urban amenities, so maybe it's not a full-time grocer, maybe it's a space that there could be like a weekend, market, or, I try to keep it broad, thinking like there's amenities in the area that are lacking. It's not just grocery, it's just that's a great example of one.
Yeah.
Maybe a developer incorporates something into something to to really look at what does the neighborhood need, what does the area need, and to try and build on that sort of connection is where I was trying to go with that. But I mean,
Yeah.
once again, keeping it broad, but I can get rid of it if y'all want it gone. I have no love or hate with anything, just sort of the background of what I was intending, and maybe I can rephrase some things too. Do we like industrial on there?
I like industrial, I also like grocery store, so
Okay,
medical office,
is it on the list, because we're not trying to get to that level of detail yet?
oh,
These are just kind of things that came out.
okay,
Office space, so that's kind of where we get into services, office
Gotcha.
space.
Got
People could come back with things like that. What about the relationship to Center 50 Plus? Does anyone think that's something that should stay on the list? Should it not stay on the list? Nate says no, it should come off the
If
list.
if there's no housing there, I don't see a direct connection.
Okay,
You could have a medical establishment that's maybe Medicare oriented. That could be a good synergy with the Center 50.
it's true.
I didn't understand.
So for medical, the medical could have, you've got the Medicare component, there could be some synergy
Oh,
with Center
sure,
50.
yeah.
So there could be that, so we can keep it on the list then. What about green building practices? Do you guys wanna keep that on the list?
no.
No.
Scott, Deacon, Dana, what do you feel about green building practices?
Neutral.
I'm gonna side with Jared on this. I think let's let the market decide. If someone wants to have a building that emphasizes green practices, then super. If they want to build a code, that's just fine too.
Okay, so maybe what we'll do is that's something that we won't keep on as a priority. But, if they wanna include it, it's something that we can consider down the line as they're putting their proposals together.
I do like encourage job creation, I feel like if you go kind of indie route, you're gonna have that other than housing. So any industrial, any commercial, that would bring, and I think that's a great one for the area.
I have to say that in terms of potential financially successful development, dealing with access egress for that site, dealing with environmental issues for the site is going to be a challenge to make it an economic reality. And adding something like green building practices is an additional expense that doesn't bring anything to the bottom line unless you're doing a lease with a government that says they will pay extra.
Well, guess what? I just crossed it off the list, so it is gone. GONE. Encouraging connections to the surrounding amenities. So this kind of goes into the urban amenities, but it's a little bit different. It's kind of like idea being, hey, developer, like you need to know the area you're in. Like how are you benefiting the area, and kind of trying to make sure that it's not like I have this pop-up model that I put everywhere, and trying to make sure that people understand the area they're kind of coming into. Is that something that's important to everybody to keep on the list? Doesn't have to be the high priority, it just stays on the list for ranking purposes?
Yeah, I think so.
Sure.
Yeah, let's keep on there.
Alright, how about a one-phase development? I feel like that's an easy one to remove, but maybe I'm wrong.
No, I think this project will be.
I don't think you cannot.
Right.
I'm gonna throw one in just to make sure y'all are paying attention.
Can you remind me, is there a light on Pine Street if you were leaving the property?
No,
Like you can't
no,
go
there's
straight,
there's no
right?
light here, no, there's no light direct from the site to Pine Street.
Okay.
No, now, a lot of that'll all be looked at depending on what happens, but your closest light is actually down here. Where you come on the other side of, when you're coming
Yeah,
out
coming Silverton.
from, when you're coming out from,
So are you thinking about the type of
from, Center 50
integrated
Plus.
intersection like Brown
Any
and
combination.
South America?
Yeah.
Where if you are in McDonald's entering a direct connection with Browning, there's a sensor.
Correct.
Okay,
Where if you're trying, like, say, I'm a trucker and I don't wanna go to the right, I wanna go straight down Pine Street and, head towards the coast or something.
that option, as far as putting in a signal at the property is something and integrated with that controlled intersection that's already there is viable. But the cost is probably $250,000.
Okay.
Oh, no, just, by the time you
Yeah.
you add the switchgear and the sensors and
Lights,
the
pole.
lighting,
Yep.
and integrate it with the city and make the necessary changes.
Mhm.
Have a preference on a local developer? Do we want that gone and just see what happens? We're having a local
It'd be
partner.
nice to have a local partner.
I don't think it matters. I don't think that's an issue.
How about partnerships with local organizations?
No.
Okay. Anybody else? We can remove it.
Design creativity.
Yeah, see, you're in it. Do you want a creative design? Do you not care if it's creative? It's,
Yeah, it'd be nice if it was decent looking, A lot of people drive by there, right?
We can keep it on the list, that works. Let's see, here, I think this is one that, kind of goes into what Scott was talking about. Is there a preference to have a for-profit developer versus a nonprofit developer?
Yes. I think so.
Is that something we want to call out? Potentially.
I think if it was a for-profit developer, they're gonna come with more money. They're not gonna be looking to us to help them fund it. I could be wrong, Dave.
Potentially, I think everybody's gonna come to us for money, but.
I think that prevailing wage contingency is a deal breaker for the project. So that if you have a private developer, they're going to look at what is allowable from urban renewal funds, and whatever that number is, then that will get figured into the project, and it'll be a simple, clean deal. Just because of the fact that it's not a very large project, it's gonna be pretty straightforward.
So you're in favor of for-profit? Or you don't care either way?
It doesn't matter.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there isn't a preference to you. Dana,
What would the-
Scott?
What would the mechanic be for how you would exclude or include a for-profit or nonprofit developer?
You wouldn't be including or excluding, it's just one of those things, and I think where this one came out of, this was one of the things that was discussed as we were looking at block 50 and block 45. Is whether or not there was a preference for having a for-profit versus a nonprofit. You get a different development type. Most nonprofit developers are housing based, so I think there might have been a conversation there. I'm not saying it should stay on the list either. My idea is, let's bring up anything that's gonna give discussion to the board. Maybe we get rid of that altogether, but we do focus in on the whole self-sustaining idea, increasing the tax increment of the area, and just sort of see how the pieces fall there. Maybe that's the way to address it.
So is it reasonable to infer then that if it were a nonprofit developer, that the property would be exempt on a nonprofit basis?
There's a good chance of that, yeah. And I think that's sort of where the conversation went with block 45 early on, was, do we want this to be a property that continues to provide to the, tax increment to the base, eventually knowing that property taxes to the city, or is it something that we're willing to sort of forego? And obviously with the financial situation that we're in, and I think with North Gateway, it's a little bit more unique, because you have to remember, here in about another year, the general fund will start collecting their portion of increments. So, this would be something that if it was a for-profit developer, would be realized immediately by, the general fund and all the taxing districts, versus it coming to the urban renewal area, which makes it a little bit more unique in that respect too.
Because of the fact that we have quite a few non-profit or not-for-profit tenants, they all file for property tax waivers with Marion County as permitted. So to suggest that this property comes off the tax rolls, I think is a negative.
So maybe what we want is, maybe what we try to do is create sort of a merge of where we have like increasing the tax increment and we've got the for-profit, and maybe what we do is we say that, we want a project that's going to add to the existing tax base.
Yes.
Just make it really broad. I'll come up with something that sounds better than that.
I like that.
But what do you guys think about that sort of approach?
I like that a lot.
Okay.
Yeah, because I mean, we put money into this, how many years ago? 5, 6 when we bought it?
We bought it. We haven't
Yeah,
put a ton
well,
of money,
no,
we made a few improvements to
I
it.
mean, when we bought
but-
it, putting money into it when we bought it.
Correct.
Our original idea, we were supposed to have food carts, a whole food cart thing here.
Well, that was gonna be temporary. So that was just gonna be a temporary use, because we wanted to do something with the site while we were holding
Yeah.
on to it, so it provided something, but then we had an agreement with a group, for about a year. There were expectations that they would be doing some business coaching and mentoring, and then from that would be some food carts. It didn't work out. And that's when COVID kind of hit, and
Yeah,
then that's
that's
also when the houseless situation really exploded, and so it just sort of morphed. But yes, we were talking about just temporary, business incubator kind of things to do, just to keep some movement on the site.
Yeah, but my thing is, we spend money on it, and so I think it's very important that we get tax coming back.
Well, I'll generate something, so I'm gonna remove increased tax increment and preference for-profit developer, and I'm gonna add a statement about sort of a project that adds to the tax base for the area. Okay, what about neighborhood connectivity? Do we want that, or do we feel like that's sort of already kind of there by encouraging connections to surrounding amenities?
Yeah.
Do we think
I'd
it's
say-
more?
How would that be different than connecting to like the other amenities like is already on the list?
Exactly, it really doesn't, it's just a different way of saying it, and so the idea is, if you guys, it seems like maybe the amenities one kind of is rising, and so it's just a matter of how we wanna phrase that, so I think, that maybe is more of what we're going for than just connecting to the neighborhood, but really what are the amenities in the area and how do you kind of become part of that, maybe it's the better way to do it.
Yeah.
Sometimes
Yeah, I like-
phrasing things in different ways can solicit a different reaction. More reactions I get out of y'all, the better. Is there anything not on the list that you think should be on the list, that you've been thinking about would be? And this isn't the last chance, I mean, when I send this out, if you're like, oh man, I really should have thought of X and I didn't, you can submit that when you do sort of your priorities, and you can add that too, and we'll incorporate it as I merge everything together. And then as we have those add-ons, it'll still be part of the conversation. Like I said, this isn't the last time you're gonna see these or have these conversations, it's just our starting point.
I think I would add a item defining the basic urban renewal potential contributions for approved components or.
When we do the call out for developers.
Yes. To say that without pushing the boundaries to doing, an exceptional thing here or this, that the base allowance for approved projects
Is our grant program and
in
tied
the
it
grant
in.
program has this set of basics.
Yeah.
In other words, infrastructure, project development, et cetera, et cetera.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, as you said before, our standard grant program is 300,000.
Right,
Anything above and beyond, we would do an exception for. So we can
Right.
definitely make sure that we connect that. This is what a standard, project would get. I'll make a
Right.
note for when we start looking at how we, do our developer outreach for that
Right.
piece.
And
a good
the
point.
reason is that there are probably potential developers for this size project that are actively involved in other involvements with urban renewal. So being able to identify that component is, I think, important in just a notification.
That's a great point. Well, I think we have a good list. I know we're getting close. So I'll clean all this up, and here within the next week, you'll get something individually from me to sort of prioritize sort of which things you think are the most important, and then I'll combine all that kind of together. And then I'll, make sure we can chat about it at our meeting in May. We won't have an April meeting, so we can, look at it then again as a group. And then at that May meeting, we'll just, we'll also have an update, for the Silverton and 17th Street project, because that's gonna start getting under construction this summer. So we're gonna have engineering here for that meeting, as well, and then, we'll have a brief update on the board merger follow-up conversation from our last meeting as well.
And real quick, I think I asked this before, someone's here or something, or the Silverton Road, is it continuing down, or it's not, right? It
No,
stops at the
It
road
stops
show?
at 17th, so just a little bit right at 17th where the intersect, that's kind of where our project ends.
Okay.
Cause we're gonna be adding the left turn lane from Silverton on the 17th, and then everything back from there we'll be doing.
Okay.
As part of this coming project.
I just didn't know if we were gonna get a new site.
It doesn't mean that could end up being part of what happens with this, is that some of those improvements get made based on the development, and then if there's that small gap. But then again, if it involves like sort of like a crossing with the railroad, then that's where everything can get delayed by years. So it could be one of those things where like we basically do improvements up to like 5 feet before we get to that, and then 5 feet post that, and then that crossing stays there until Public Works is, looking to do something, other crossings or something of that nature. Oftentimes that kind of does happen. So we'll be taking that into consideration though, as like what other improvements, and maybe that's where we have some funds, a little bit of infrastructure in pocket that we can clean up some of that area to help with that connectivity for sure. So we'll work on that as part of the project. So thank you for this great discussion, everybody. I really appreciate it. I know it's early. It's a lot of ideas, but I think it's just gonna lead to hopefully a really cool project.
Yeah, and now everybody can take a little bit of time to think about it too.
Yeah, there's no rush. I'll send it out to you guys, and then, I won't really give a deadline. Get it back to me when you can. If you don't get it back to me in a couple weeks, I'll probably bug y'all. But that'll give you time to kind of think about what you'd like to see there, and if you do have more ideas. And then we can definitely bring those back to the group too. I don't want people to feel like this was your one chance and that's it. We're not slowing down the process, but we're also not trying to speed through it so fast that people don't feel like we really thought some of this stuff through, especially you folks who just bring a lot to the team and to the conversation.
Anything else? Did we lose?
Didn't have any left.
Okay.
We were wrapping up.
Yeah. No problem. Okay, well, thanks everybody for showing up, and we'll look forward to your email.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Thanks, Deacon.
See you, Deacon.
See you later.
Sorry to figure out what